Quase que comecei a falar em espanhol, porque vou apresentar uma pessoa em espanhol, mas estamos de volta para apresentar o painel Kim Marie Spence, mas ela vai ser apresentada pela Karina. Vamos chamar a Karina aqui. Hola, Karina, ¿qué tal? ¿Me oyes bien?
Hello. Yes, I hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Bienvenida. Vamos a hablar en español aquí, Karina, primero, ¿vale? Y voy a presentarte en español también. Un momento solamente que voy a abrir aquí. Bueno. Solo un momentito. Bueno, Karina es la directora general de la Asociación Triple Hélice y también trabaja como directora de proyectos, investigadora y profesora en La Salle Universidad Ramón. La doctora Rapetti tiene un PhD en ecosistemas de innovación y obtuvo su primer título de ingeniería industrial en la Universidad de Buenos Aires. Además, cuenta con 3 másteres en energías renovables y sostenibilidad, ciudades y comunidades inteligentes y gestión de proyectos de La Salle Universidad Ramón Llull. Universidad Ramón Llull, y también muy amiga de nuestro amigo Josep Piqué, que estuvo en el primer Encuentro Internacional en 2021. Y entonces, ¿estás dónde? ¿Estás en Barcelona?
Sí, estoy en Barcelona.
Muy bien.
Aquí
Entonces,
las 3 de la tarde aquí.
Muy bien, Karina, tú vas a moderar la presentación de Kim y te agradezco muchísimo por tu colaboración en nuestro evento.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Ahora voy a cambiar al inglés también para hacer la introducción con Kim. Thank you very much to everyone to invite me to be part of this remarkable conference and especially in these interesting sessions that focus on tolerance, diversity, and human capital within the creative placemaking in the case of Kingston, Jamaica. And as Jorge mentioned before, our special speaker is Dr. Kim Marie Spence. Hello, Kim.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm going to introduce you and allow you to speak respecting the time. Kim Marie is lecturer in creative industry and policy and cultural policy at Queen's University Belfast. She is also an adjunct lecturer in film studies at the Caribbean School of Media and Communications at the University of West Indies, Jamaica. She researched popular cultures industries and cultural policies on the non-West with focus on the music industries of K-pop and reggae. She also worked with UNESCO, focusing on the intangible heritage. She was the founding executive director of the Caribbean Policy Research Institute. And Kim Marie is also co-author of the book Global Cultural Economy and sits on the boards of the MAC Belfast and Kingston Creative at Jamaican Cultural District Initiative. So, Kim, really welcome to this interesting session. The moment is yours, please.
Thank you. I would like to thank particularly the conference team for having this fabulous fabulous format to have presentations from all over the world. Today I'm here in dual roles as one director of Kingston Creative from Jamaica and also a Creative Cities academic, and so utilizing both inside and outsider knowledge to present on tolerance, diversity, and human capital. Interestingly, having listened to the previous presentation by Renata Horowitz, thanks to all my Spanish teachers, I was you know, I am moving from the cultural heritage, etc., to a focus on the people and the communities around which these cultural expressions, cultural industries, and cultural heritage, the ones who create it, whose lives is a part of, etc. And so it's very much a focus on the people rather than the patrimonial or the heritage. And without further ado, I will start. And I should also note thank you to the Kingston Creative team, without which there would be no case study. So here I have, so I start off, as I noted, with tolerance, diversity, and human capital within creative placemaking. Am I moving this? Yes. So there has been a lot of discussion on creative placemaking since 2010, where there's discussion of what is creative placemaking. Creative placemaking was defined as a process where partners shape the physical and social character of a neighborhood, a town, a city, a region around arts and cultural activities to bring diverse people together to celebrate, inspire, and be inspired. So this was the definition that Anne Markison and Anne Nicodemus had in 2010. Now we forward to what we associate with cultural districts or creative placemaking, and it has very much focused on the cultural consumption aspect of it, the aspect of people going to see, to be inspired, and less on the aspect of it as a source of inspiration to do other things, and particularly in terms of the focus on cultural producers. So it's been very much about cultural consumption, about us, being touched by the arts, and very much part of what is called the experience economy. So here we have from the last art walk. So every last Saturday, the Kingston Creative, this cultural district initiative, of which I'm presenting on, every last Sunday, they have an art walk where you tour a particular part of Kingston, downtown Kingston, and see the sites, the cultural sites, both new and old. So here we have people taking pictures of some of the new stuff, i.e. the murals that have cropped up to informally mark this part of Kingston. And then we have this particular part had a show associated with it because it was actually on the eve of Jamaica's independence. So there was a fashion show, music show, etc. And so you see people sitting in the road, watching the show and being seen, being introduced to the culture of not only that part of Kingston, but Jamaican culture much larger. So in that sense, Kingston Creative has this cultural consumption aspect in similarity with other cultural districts, but there is much more. And this is why I continue to study Kingston Creative. Kingston Creative has also realized that there needs to be a greater focus on cultural production, i.e. the creatives, those who produce, those who create, those who inspire us. Recently, particularly on the heels of the COVID pandemic, and I know it's still out whether it has ended or not, there has been a lot written about care, particularly given that I am speaking in Brazil today, particularly coming out of Argentina. There has been a lot of work by, say, Paula Serafini and Noela Novosel on culture as care. They wrote this in 2021, but in 2018, when Kingston Creative was created, care and care of downtown Kingston's creatives and Jamaica's creatives writ large has been a part of the conversation. So now for some background on Kingston Creative in particular. All cultural districts and all creative placemaking involve communities because of that physical aspect. This is a map created by Kingston Creative of the section of Kingston in which they are based, the downtown Kingston. Now, Kingston, as a lot of you might know, is the capital of Jamaica. Downtown Kingston in particular is the oldest part of the city. It is the port, which, you know, anything from banana, sugarcane, whatever came through this port. It's also the part of the city in which reggae was born. So for those who are fans of Bob Marley, this is the part of the city that Trenchtown is located. It is also home, because as the oldest part, to a number of the oldest cultural institutions, such as the Institute of Jamaica, the National Gallery, the Synagogue, the market, the Coronation Market. And so it is still home to the courts, the banks, and a number of prominent government institutions and ministries. But it is also home to some of the most marginalized communities in the city, of which Trenchtown is one. Interestingly, this is not unusual. It is not unusual for creative placemaking, and particularly the Strand cultural districts, to emerge from the poorer neighborhoods of a city. One, cheap rents, easier to inhabit, and despite the celebration of the creative economy, despite the celebration of creative practitioners and artists, reality is they're also one of the most precarious parts of the labor market. Gig economy, and the pandemic in particular exposed that. And so the need for cheap rents, a place is attractive to the often precarious cultural workers and creatives. When we think about Wynwood in Florida, and which is Instagram friendly, all over Instagram, the cultural district of Miami, we also realized that actually this was a home of a fairly poor Puerto Rican community. And it's interesting to note the was, because as creative placemaking happens, it tends to drive up property prices. Yuppies, or for want of a better term, yuppies tend to move in. And so the property prices go up, and the original inhabitants and the artistic inhabitants get priced out. And so we have gentrification, which I know Renata spoke about in her presentation, or as some want to call it, gentrification. And so we see here in downtown Kingston, all these different, in the blue and the yellow, all the different cultural monuments. But you see that Kingston Creative has added, whether it's murals or other cultural markers there, which I'll get into later. So this gentrification and gentrification has had such an impact, to the point that it has been an issue for creative placemaking worldwide, not just in Miami, not just in South America, all over, this issue of, so how do we deal with this? To the point that some have talked about it almost being a privatization of public space. So where do we go? Do we just not have creative placemaking? Well, looking at Kingston Creative, and I will note that it's still a work in progress. We're still learning lessons as it goes on. Realize that one aspect of this is paying attention to the communities both the geographic community and the creative community. So let us start with the creative. One of the aspects of the philosophy of KC is a place for us all. So in 2019, there was a whole discussion of the signature programs of Kingston Creative. I've mentioned the art walk. The other one has been the mural project. It's a way for us to informally mark this part of the city. In 2019, there was a discussion about, let us do a mural to embrace the LGBTIQ community of Jamaica. Now, previous murals had venerated cultural icons, Toots and the Maytals, Jimmy Cliff, just been cultural expressions, just the whole realm of whether heritage or current popular culture or just creative expression. And so there was one of, let us do a mural that embraces the LGBTIQ community. Now, in Jamaica, this is a discussion that despite progress such as its first Pride celebration in 2015, Jamaica has been infamous for its homophobia. Sodomy still remains illegal. Anti-LGBTIQ violence is not unusual, and there are no guaranteed rights and protections under the law. So, however, significant sections of Jamaica's creative community are members and allies of the LGBTIQ community. So what happens? So then what was done was a mural, an inclusive mural that says, we are all Jamaicans, and one that is done in a way in the fashion of a society such as Jamaica. And so with that mural, there was a whole discussion internally of the need to showcase the inclusive and intersectional nature of the Cultural District project. It just had to be. And so that is one aspect internally of realizing the responsibilities to the creative community. But likewise, there's another community intersecting and overlapping, but distinct, which is the downtown Kingston communities, which of course there would be some culture clash, hence the nature of this mural. So as I noted, the downtown Kingston community is the port of Kingston. And so one aspect of Kingston Creative was the activation and the regeneration and all these terms of downtown Kingston. But it had to be one that was of downtown Kingston, not for downtown Kingston. So since when Kingston Creative was founded in 2018, downtown Kingston was a no-go area. It is home to, according to Jamaica's Social Development Commission, 23 different marginalized communities. And so the founders, including its now storied Executive Director, Andrea Denta-Chung, Alan Daisley, a group of Jamaicans had decided that this culturally rich location that included Trenchtown, included the origins of VP Records, and was the home to the Whalers, etc., was ripe to be a cultural district. But how to do it? In 2018, the first art walk was held, and this included showing, in cooperation with the National Gallery, group of people for free were guided to the different cultural institutions on a Sunday. And so uncharacteristically, these institutions were open and people toured through the National Gallery, the Institute of Jamaica, looked at And the rest stops were downtown Kingston vendors who had opened for the day. So instead of bringing in pop-up shops, the watermelon vendor, the local bar, etc., served as the rest stops. And this became increasingly popular. And he realized that the cooperation had to go beyond cooperation with legacy cultural institutions and beyond cooperation with residents that happened to provide refreshments and other food services. It had to be a cooperation with the communities. So how to do this? Well, it required being inclusive, of course, but it also required time and person. It meant empowerment, i.e., not empowerment to do, but also empowerment to make decisions about the direction of the Kingston Creative Project. So it's a much wider definition of empowerment. So one was the collaboration with the different arts and cultural organizations, initiatives, and artists within the 23 communities of downtown Kingston. So here I have pictures of the art walks that happened in these communities. So the first art walks often happened in this central section here, where you see the cluster, where this central section, so I'll go back to the map, where you see the cluster of national cultural institutions, and moved outwards into these communities. And so I'm showing pictures here from the Trenchtown and Raytown art walks. So art walks were planned in collaboration with the different institutions and leaders of the communities themselves. So there was a Trenchtown art walk one Sunday, there was a Raytown art walk, where we would go to the cultural arts and cultural sites of these communities, and also with the different creatives from that community. So we see here one of the local dancehall squads coming out of Raytown. We see school marching band also from Raytown, and then we have pictures from Trenchtown. I believe this might be one of the cultural sites, because of course Trenchtown does get a lot of that creative character, having been the home of a certain generation of reggae and continuing to produce dancers and reggae/dancehall artists. But this would not be possible if internally there wasn't a commitment within Kingston Creative to making this collaboration possible. Internally, when it had started as a volunteer organization, so I will note this is a work in progress, so it is transitioning to organization with a pay core and then a core of volunteers. As it is in its 6th year now, there was always a community pod. So we see here there is an events pod, the ones that manage and produce the art walk. Then we see there's an art district pod, which tends to focus on the mural project, and also collaboration with local government and policymakers. And then I highlight the community pod, where this pod is dedicated to communication and collaboration with the community. There have been some lessons as per working with marginalized communities. There has been a need that it's not enough to WhatsApp or send a text message. You have to be there. And so there have been people going to the different community meetings. So as part of Jamaica's whole community or social welfare outreach, each community has a community development meeting each month or every 2 months. And so Kingston Creative would go to be a part of it. So rather than stand apart and contact leaders indirect outside of that, has been part of the already existing community development mechanism where community leaders and residents discuss. That's where Kingston Creative, which I will refer to as KC, goes to discuss these things. And so it means then that community members become and influence what happens in Kingston Creative, but not just from the outside. We also have, and I highlight the core community members on our board, and I will note we need more. In each of these different parts, there are community members. And so this means then that what happens out of Kingston Creative is, to paraphrase an American term, of the community, somewhat by the community, and mostly for the community. And that has been something to learn, that it's not enough to go to these, but also it includes things such as all services, all of the paid services have discounts for the businesses, for businesses from the downtown Kingston community. It's not, and this has been an important part of serving these two interrelated but distinct communities, the creative community and the geographic downtown Kingston community. In the book that Karina mentioned, I know that Global Cultural Economy book, Christian de Boucle and I had thought to think of the different ways in which people approach the cultural and creative economy, the different types of policies. A lot of time with creative placemaking, it tends to fall into this first column, the celebratory, where it's, once we have arts and culture, it's optimistic, uncritical, etc., very much focused on people paying to consume culture, but not a lot on the juxtaposition of the precarity of those who create culture, the precarity of those who live in these communities. So also, there is the aspect of the aspirational, where we want to have this creative placemaking that is like that place in London, or like that place in Berlin, and so on and so forth, to be counted among the great creative placemaking sites or cultural districts of the world, without attention to what happens internally, without attention to the communities, the local communities that these cultural districts are part of, whether they like it or not. So we have moved towards the reflexive, where realize that there is a contradiction there, in terms of the intersections of class, in Jamaica, race and color, in this cultural district initiative, and trying to find ways, not just programmatically, but in terms of the very macro structure of Kingston Creative, to address these. And we are still listening to comments. I will note that the comments about needing to have much more downtown Kingston residents included was one that came up in maybe our second year, and one that we listened to. So how has this volunteer project that has this very much hybrid bottom-up philosophy, how has it managed to survive? It's been funded by a variety of funding sources in a country where multi-annual grant funding for cultural initiatives is unusual. There has been notion of, so yes, and so they've been funded by the diaspora, by by the IDB, by local government, etc. And the results, tours as part of the income generation, apps that have been created so that creatives can sell their products both locally and abroad on the Culture Connect app. The Creative Hub that has become a co-working space, has a podcast studio, and a place for small creative businesses has been the result. So these have been the income generation, but also serving the communities. And I will note that most of the tour guides are from the community themselves. They've also been international partnerships with, such as the John Hansard Gallery, that has allowed local artists to be exhibited and promoted both in Jamaica and abroad. And so what have been the results? The results, one, named the Best Creative Destination Award, received the Best Creative Destination Award in 2023. So here we have the Minister of Tourism collecting the award on behalf of Kingston Creative. But we also have just recently signed a MOU with the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation. So that's basically the city government, as part of this Kingston Creative Initiative. So we have the exec director and the mayor hugging here, because we realize, and why is there a need for an MOU if we're already doing these things? Because sustainability means embedding the culture both within the cultural and creative communities and the neighborhoods. It requires inclusivity, intersectionality, and shared decision-making. And that shared decision-making includes partnership with policymakers. The things about gentrification in terms of price, rental prices, etc., those are policy issues, and realizing that no NGO can do that alone. And so Kingston Creative is an example of that inclusivity, intersectionality, and shared decision-making, but also a realization that to deal with the tolerance, diversity, and human capital aspects and the sustainability, there's a need to reach out to policymakers as well. And I will stop here. Oh, I will note, thank you to the Kingston Creative team and the communities of downtown Kingston and Jamaica for allowing me to share this story. Yes, as part of the Kingston Creative team, yes, but also, these are sticky conversations happening internally. And so that, and I will note that we empower that our goal is to empower creatives and transform the downtown Kingston community. And again, that dual community prospect. And I will stop there. I'm happy to go back and look at particular aspects, but yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kim. It was really, really interesting, the presentation. I love the session from the beginning with this remarkable topic. You talk about placemaking, and which is the idea of placemaking, what you exactly explained. Try to capitalize the local community asset to improve the quality of life. Just to summarize your words.
Yeah.
And how could it be possible if we don't talk about tolerance, inclusion, and you use all these core words just from the beginning?
No, thank you.
In the title.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I have highlighted is that a lot of times we talk about tolerance, inclusion, and diversity, and we're talking about LGBTIQ communities, or we're talking about race, but particularly in creative placemaking, we also have to talk about socioeconomic differences and class. It's not enough to, because it's an intersectional approach. doing one and not the other does not count. And so you see where Kingston Creative has over the years been like, okay, LGBTIQ, okay, wait, and realize it's not enough to have one initiative over here for that community and one in it actually needs to meet and be integrated into the very nature of it. And that has been one of the learning aspects. Interestingly, at the end, you realize that part of that inclusivity, part of that intersectionality and the way to guarantee has meant realizing the limits of what an NGO can do when you have a place. In the place, there is, you make alliances with communities and you work, etc., with creative and the geographic communities, but you realize that in terms of policy for the place and dealing with the issues of gentrification, you're going to have to reach out to the policymakers. Mm-hmm. And so, which is not what we like to hear in the NGO sector, and particularly in the global south. But the reality is, who can deal with making legislation protections for the place? And luckily, I chose that picture because they were hugging, but maybe not good for seeing the faces of the mayor and the executive director.
No, yes, but it's really, really important to have this, let's say, both kind of bottom up and top down, maybe at the beginning too, in some, this you mentioned before, legislation, maybe it could be something top down, but to engage people, to make them to be part, it must to be bottom up, but they must to be part of the decision. So to respect them.
Right, Karina, I agree wholeheartedly. And I will note that we didn't have a choice to when what happened, right? Mm-hmm. But hindsight, as I say, is 20/20 vision. And in hindsight, you realize that actually, if we had to advise others, we would say build that bottom up first and then go to, so I'm not advocating, because now that you have that strong core in terms of the philosophy, there have been initiatives that we've wanted to do that the core has been like, that's not, and listening to that and respecting that. And so now as a stronger institution that already has that embedded and mainstream within its core, making partnerships with policymakers has become an advantage rather than the top-down aspect, and they become one of the partners. I will note from the very first, I think one of our first 50, so we had this, in one of the slides, they had first 50 as one of the funders, and that had been in 2018, right, shortly after we started. We needed money. You can volunteer, but when you're having a volunteer operation, it cannot go internally. There are issues in terms of that dealing with the care aspects for your own people. You need to have, it's fine for one of us all to do everything for free, but we can't do that indefinitely. Mm-hmm. Yes. The nonprofit sector we need to actually be aware we care for others, but we need to care for our people as well. And so we required funds for refreshments, and things like that. And so we had our first 50. Who will be the first 50 to donate $1 million Jamaican dollars? $1 million Jamaican dollars is not that much in US dollars. So I will note, so $1 million Jamaican dollars. One of those was the Ministry of Culture at that time. A lot came from downtown businesses who just said, okay, we'll, the first 50, we actually reached 50 in year 6.
Very good. And I link this last comment that you made with the conclusion, let's say, that you present. You use the word sustainability. And I understood this in a wide meaning. Sustainability in all the aspects of sustainability, because in the current knowledge economy that we are living, talent is the raw material, is the main material. And if you create this district, this creative district in which the quality of life and the people is the core, you also will attract talent. And that's why I linked it with the economic sustainability of the idea.
Yes.
It's also linked.
Oh, Karina, I really like that because, okay, the sustainability, I think in 2023, when we hear sustainability, we think the environment. Again, it is just about a wide 360-degree approach to these issues. Environment is, of course, important, as we can see this summer. Okay, but sustainability is also about how can we keep this going beyond the original funders? How, if everyone changes out tomorrow, can this keep going? How do we embed this in the structure where we continue to build on one on top of the other? In a recent presentation I gave, as a part of a consultancy with a city, I talked about there's a need for a strong foundation because we don't want to build another leaning Tower of Pisa. And the reason the Tower of Pisa leans is not because they built it that way, it's because the foundation is weak and they keep having to prop it up and it leans again and they keep having to prop it up. We want a straight Tower of Pisa. So in that sense, you're building in these kinds of philosophies, but you're also, in terms of reaching out to policymakers, stronger. And once you actually know what it is that will support this vision, it gets embedded. We all pay taxes. You don't get to choose it. So it's that sense of that policy infrastructure that you embed it in it, so that if this organization passes tomorrow, the principles of the Creative Hub will still continue. Culture Connect, the app on which people can sell their products, will still continue.
Okay, yeah. Well, I have more questions from my side. I would like to first check if there is any question in the audience. If it's not, I feel really interested about this topic, so I have other questions, and maybe it inspires others. I will start, and please, if someone have a question, let me know. My first question, because at the beginning we check a bit the topic that is a good topic. I would like to know, given your affiliation with the Kingston Creative Board, which is a valued partner, I would like to hear your insight with the following question. Could you please elaborate its present status or ongoing initiatives or forthcoming plans? And additionally, just to give you and let you talk, what do you anticipate as the key challenge for the future? And now, yes, please.
So, so I didn't get to go into a lot of the programmatic aspects. So I did talk about the tours. I talked about the Creative Hub. I should note one of the key initiatives that has cropped up is Creative. So I noted that we had gotten funding from the Inter-American Development Bank. And through that, we're able to have what is called Creative, where it's different initiatives teaching creative aspects of business, from social media marketing to registration of businesses, etc. So you realize these are skills that we think, okay, because there's the internet and we can get on, but everyone's on the internet. How do you be seen? And these are still principles that everyone does not just know. And so it's been part of that to tell people how to navigate both the business aspect, but also the fundamentals of a business, like such as registration, etc. And so we have had pulling in expertise from all over Kingston's and Jamaica's creative sector, have been running courses, etc. And these courses have been, again, we wrote a whole article about partnership. Again, some of these courses you'll get a certificate that is certified by one of the vocational training institutions of Jamaica. So that's been a big one. There's been a discussion. So what happens when, because it is a project, what happens when the project ends? While the project has been ongoing, we have created that creative hub. And so that the infrastructure of a co-working space, a place which is in that downtown Kingston, a co-working space with a podcast studio, etc., remains. We are still discussing, so where do we go with that? What will it transform to without the IDB money? And so that's been an ongoing discussion. One of the aspects of our early poverty, i.e., the not having one funder has been, we've had a number of different funders. And so when one passes, doesn't mean that the whole infrastructure falls away. But again, you have to think, all right, so where do we move to the next step? So every time there's a funder for a certain project, is how do we go to the next step? And so that's been one aspect. Culture Connect has also been, it's one of the newest ones. We actually had a store at one point, and then COVID came. So we had a shop front where people with stock and were run by members of the creative community on behalf of Kingston Creative. That was fabulous. But then the pandemic came and no one was going to a store. And out of that came Culture Connect, actually having an app where you can go on and order t-shirts, ceramics, craft, whatever. And that's not a year old yet. So we're still watching it to see, will this work? But I think it's an important aspect to add to this conversation of the people aspect, that, so much is, we're all, a lot of the creative work, creative economies, creative entrepreneurs, etc. But we, especially being in Brazil or in Jamaica, etc., are coming from societies where it's even more precarious than usual, because informality is not just a characteristic of our creative communities, it's a characteristic of our societies.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I would like to now switch a bit and ask you regarding recognizing the district's central emphasis on ecosystem level collaboration. I would like to know, understand the challenge associated with an effective executing collective effort.
The challenges. So I had it's not easy. One thing is, you get why people just, okay, I'll just make the decision. It is easier.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, the collective effort means that we are all coming at these things from different positions, whether it's myself as an academic, so I'm looking, well, all the different case studies I track, these seem to work. And then those with the lived experience of being in the neighborhood, and then the lived experience of being a Jamaican creative can weigh in and be like, yes. And so from that, there's a honing of, and then also a number of those who had been volunteers had also been in the social work and social care sector of the, and so you have to be willing to realize that no matter how great whatever I'm looking at in Berlin was working, it might not work in Jamaica, and just realize, or it might not be, interestingly, the time, because there have been ideas that would not have worked in year 2, that its time has come around in year 6.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a need for us all to realize that we're sitting on equal ground. And I know it's a whole cliche, people are like, oh, well, no, you actually, and that might require people sitting at the same table that don't normally sit at the same table. So that's a revolution internally. And it requires us not just assuming these norms, but saying them and making them clear. I think there's a lot in, creative placement that we assume that, we're all at the table, so we're all, and I think there has been some cognitive thing of reiterating the principles of the space as very, I don't know how this term will be translated, as very kumbaya as that seems. I don't know, very, but reality, there's something to be said of when we say things and we hear it, us being like, all right, we have to treat each other as equals at this table, and being the back and forth. And it also requires that in your decision making, there has to be a representation there.
Okay. And you have a master in communication in these cases, because you have to communicate assertively the wins, the things that you win, but also to hear deeply what each of them need to implement it. Okay. Now I have more questions for sure, but I have one question from the audience. Josep Miquel Piquet. I know him very well. He's also expert in innovation ecosystem, and he asked how you combine different cultural industries in the same district. Is there a balanced mix? Music, performance, art, food. Is there also quadruple helix contribution needed? Quadruple helix regarding the civil society.
Right. That is a very good question, actually, Jose. So I had mentioned that one of the signature activities had been this last Sunday art walk. And I showed some pictures from that where people were watching the shows, etc. And that has been, again, it has become a way to involve the different cultural industries. By each month, there's a different focus. So the notion of that would have been almost impossible, and realizing there are one, because Jamaica is just overflowing with cultural and creative talent. So it's not like you have just two people from any creative or cultural sector, but also that it allows for understanding of how each of them works. So for example, the last one was fashion, and so it very much focused on fashion designers, and there was even a model search happening in the middle of all that. So that opened up the model search to basically anyone that was there. But also there have been literature so each month there have been literature ones that have had writers of renowned and emerging writers coming to discuss how their industries work. And I will note that this art walk has a number of different components. So there's so much to talk about. It's hard to get it in a small presentation, but the art walk is more the touring aspect and very much a cultural consumption aspect. Every Friday before an art walk, there is a meetup. And so that's very much like almost a networking session between those in that particular creative industry. And so we invite a panel that will discuss. So for example, when we had the film panel, we invited the then film commissioner, some of the noted film directors, some of the marketers, etc., at that much smaller event. So they talked about. And then, of course, on the Sunday, so that's very much the cultural production, the networking. On the Sunday, you get to watch the films, you get to, buy the craft, etc. And so there is that, and so that discipline or of each month, there's a different creative industry, has been the way we've dealt with it. Of course, every, and performing arts, music, and we keep going. And so I think we've now just started even during COVID, we actually went online and we still kept this is the music, and then we had people come in and perform. And I will note that all performers at the art walk are paid, maybe not the market, but yeah, unless they decide. But there has been a sense that we shouldn't add to that already unpaid labor, even if it is a stipend, etc.
Okay, thank you. We have 2 minutes before we close this interesting session. I will ask you just a small question. Well, it is not, the question is small. I will kindly ask you to...
There are no small questions.
The question is small, the answer is big, but just to use this last minute before we close, in your perspective, what lies ahead for creative territories in a global scale? I know the question is small, but...
So it's interesting because, as I said, I co-authored a book, Global Cultural Economy, and we're probably in need of, especially post-pandemic, probably a second round, because the conversation has changed, if not the economies themselves. What next is one of the things I've been following from actually the policy aspect. I think the pandemic has exposed just how precarious cultural and creative labor is globally, even though we rely on it so much for our well-being, etc. There have been books coming out, culture is bad for you, how music makes you sick. We love music, but most musicians are on the poverty line. So I think that is, that attention to that in policy spheres will be one of the moves forward. Coming from an NGO perspective or the Kingston Creative perspective, I think there has always been, and I suspect it's also our global South location, there's always been a focus on empowerment, not just in decision making, but economic empowerment and I suspect that will become more prevalent in the global North. I mean, I don't believe it's more a spectrum than as binary, but I suspect that kind of attention to the economic empowerment that it's hard to create when you don't have food, when you don't have resources. I think that will be one of the moves forward, and I'm hoping that sticks beyond Kingston Creative and much wider.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And it's great to meet you, Karina, and thank you to the International Conference team.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation, your energy. You have a really good energy. All of us felt that. I would like to also thank this event organizer, the Universidad Federal de Santa Catalina, EGC VIA, UrbsNova, and District C. Keep following us on social media, and the next lecture starts in a few minutes, in 1 minute to be precise. Stay tuned, and we return with the same link.
Hola, Karina, ¿me oyes?
Sí, te oigo perfecto, Jorge.
Muy bien, una presentación brillante de Kim y una excelente conversación, interacción contigo. Se han levantado muchos temas importantísimos desde el punto de vista de distritos creativos. Entonces, Karina, quería, además con la intervención de nuestro amigo José Miquel Piqué. Y desde Barcelona también. Entonces te agradezco muchísimo por tu ayuda, por tu colaboración, y sabemos que tú tienes una relación muy grande con Brasil también, y esperamos encontrarte en una próxima oportunidad. Un gran abrazo para ti.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a Clarisa Stefani, que también me invitó, y muy orgullosa de ser parte de esta conferencia, y sí, como bien dices, estaremos pronto en Brasil trabajando en otros proyectos, así que muchas gracias.
Muy bien, hasta pronto.
Hasta pronto.
Bom,